right, everyone, let's get started. So welcome to those of you who are here in person, and welcome to those of you who are joining us online. Before we introduce our guest of honor, Aaron Green, today, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the process. Aaron has kindly given us permission to record his presentation, and this will eventually be put up on our IANDS NoVA YouTube channel. Now, those of you who are joining us online, if you'd like to ask a question, and we do encourage you to ask questions, he's going to tell about his experience, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Those of you who are joining us online, if you'd like to ask a question, you can do so in one of two ways. You can raise your hand, and we'll come to you, and then you'll be asking your question with an open camera. Or you can ask the question through the chat. Just keep in mind, if you do decide to raise your hand, you'll be on camera and you'll be on the recording that will eventually go onto YouTube. So just keep that in mind. But again, you have the option, if you're not comfortable with that, to ask the question through the chat. And those of you who are here in person can come to the mic and ask the question, or you can, there are some pads on the stool there. You can write your question and give it to me, and I'll ask Aaron. So I'd like to introduce our guest of honor now. And I just want to say that Aaron had a near-death experience just before he turned the tender age of 6. He had some breathing difficulties, and this resulted in an out-of-body experience, essentially, a near-death experience. What I found fascinating about his particular experience when I came across his presentation was his sort of the pre-birth process, his pre-birth planning. And what I remember most about it is that when he was planning to become Aaron, I think he asked the council of elders or the people on the other side that were guiding him. I think he wanted to sort of have some extreme characteristics. I'm not going to steal your thunder, have some extreme characteristics, and very ambitious, interesting characteristics. And I think they said, well, if you choose to have that, you can, but it's going to change your life experience. You're going to be treated X, Y, and Z ways. And then I think as a result of that, you decided to alter your choices a little bit, but you're right. A lot more about that. But that really stuck out in my mind because I've never heard that before. So please, Aaron, welcome everybody. Aaron Green, and take it away, Aaron.
All right. Well, thank you, Angie. I'm excited to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to share my experience. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about, me, who am I from the outside? What do I look like? And then share my experience, and then talk a little bit about some of the spiritual concepts that I think are important and stuff related to my experience that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough. And so I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And then I guess we'll do some questions and answers kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So just a little bit about me. Can we put up the first picture? I'm married with 3 kids. My kids are all here we go. Here's a picture of us. There's my wife on the right, obviously, and our 3 kids in the middle, and then I have a dog there, a Labradoodle. Anyway, my kids are all like leaving home. My oldest 2 are in college, and my youngest son, he's going to be a senior in high school next year. We live in Chesapeake, Virginia. I've been in this area for a long time. So I work as an electrical engineer. Can we go on to the second picture? So I work at the company Newport News Shipbuilding. They make aircraft carriers and submarines. My work, I worked on what is now the Ford class aircraft carrier for 24 years. I do instrumentation and control, electrical work inside the engine room, basically. So most of my work is in a cubicle, on the computers, talking to other people. But here's the ship I worked on for a long time at Sea Trials, and I was actually on the ship during this picture. But normally I'm just in a cubicle. Normally my job's not that exciting. Can we go on to the third picture? So I was born in North Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, in 1975. When I was 2, I moved to my family and I moved to Chesapeake, Virginia, and we lived in a house in a neighborhood, and Back then before computers and lots of TV channels and cell phones and that kind of stuff, we would just roam the neighborhood. And so here's a picture of me shortly before my sixth birthday, I think. And I remember um, when this picture was taken, like when we were in the waiting area, I remember thinking about my experience during that, while we were waiting to be seen by the photographer. And anyway, so this gives you an idea of the age I was at when my experience happened. It was just a little bit before this picture was taken. So I had been playing with some friends in a neighbor's backyard. We were, doing whatever it is we normally did back then, just having fun. And something happened. I'm not quite sure what, but I developed a breathing difficulty. And no matter what I did, I couldn't get air into my lungs. I couldn't take a breath. And I was getting very upset and very concerned about this. This was becoming a bigger and bigger problem with every passing second. So I decided to go home, and I only got maybe 20 steps away from my friends, and something happened. This breathing problem triggered a release of my consciousness or my soul from my body. Whatever it is I really am, the real me, my soul, my consciousness, it left my body at that point, and I watched as my body fell to the ground. Can we go to the fourth picture for just a second? So this is a picture I created with artificial intelligence image generation. Obviously, this is not a real picture, but this kind of just gives you an idea of what that looked like from my perspective. So I could see my body laying on the ground, and I existed as kind of a round orb of light, just floating there. And I had some friends in the background that at, at that point when this first started, they weren't paying any attention to me. But this is kind of what my perspective was like when this experience started. I was just this orb floating there. But okay, you can end that picture now. But so when I left my body, it was obvious that I was more than just that body. That like the body is not who I was. I was this as I existed at that point in time. I was this orb of light, and initially, like immediately, there was a couple realizations that I had. One was that obviously I'm more than just this body. And another realization was that the flow of time just felt different. Somehow it didn't work the same, and I could feel that. It was just very obvious. And a couple of things happened almost immediately when this experience started. One was that my entire life replayed before me in extreme detail, from birth all the way up into that time where I left my body. And it felt like it was really, really short. Like I felt like I had not really done anything in life. Like the decisions that I had made, that they were, I don't know, inconsequential or not important. It felt like a very, very brief 6 years. And it all just happened in the flash of an eye. It felt like less than a second, like very quickly. And a couple things really stood out, though. One was that I could literally feel my parents' feelings, like how I had affected them. I could literally feel that. And that kind of stood out. And there was a couple situations that really stood out to me. One was that during my life, I could like feel my mother's love for me, and that seemed like it was really important. Like it had a deeper spiritual importance to it. And then I could also feel my father's frustration with dealing with a crying child and dirty diapers and that kind of thing. And now that I'm a parent of a parent myself, I can understand and relate to that. But at the time, like I could feel his frustration, and that kind of stood out to me. He was a good father, but the frustrations he experienced being a new dad stood out to me. Anyway, that life review ended pretty quickly. It felt like it was not like my life had been very brief. And then I kind of noticed in the distance there was a pinpoint of light, and I like instinctively knew that there was something important about that light. but I didn't really focus too much attention on it. I kind of like, I knew I had forgotten what the importance of it was, but that it was important. So I didn't continue to focus my attention on this pinpoint of light in the distance. Instead, I just kind of started floating there. I was just, I guess, meandering about the backyard, trying to understand what was going on. I was more intelligent than I had been. Um, it, it was kind of like waking up from a dream, only the dream was this physical reality, and I was waking up into a higher spiritual reality. And it felt like I was more me, um, I don't know if this is a little bit hard to explain, but it felt like being this person, being Aaron, wasn't the real me. Like the real me was what I was outside of the body, and I was more intelligent, and like with each moment, I felt like I was more comfortable and more aware, and like I was regaining my what I felt like were my natural senses and ability to think and perceive things. Anyway, um, I started to have some questions, and one of the first questions I have was, "What am I?" I knew I wasn't that physical body. I was just kind of floating around as an orb, and I thought, what am I? What's going on? And I could I was able to like see myself in more detail, how I existed like that. And I just saw a round orb of with faint light coming from within, and that's just what I looked like while I was uh, floating around in this backyard. Anyway, I had more questions, and as I would have questions, the answers would come to me, and the answers were like I was remembering something that I had previously experienced, but I had forgotten about as I was living this life. And one of the first questions I have after what am I, was where did I come from? Why am I here on this planet? What's going on? And when I had that question, it's like the memory of that answered that question replayed for me. So this is all stuff I had previously experienced. And so the spiritual memory that replayed, it began, I existed like that orb of consciousness, and I was with hundreds or thousands of other orbs just like that. And we were all together in what I would call a sea of light. We existed in a state of happiness, and we were content, and there was no problems, and we were we were kind of like friends with each other, and we just existed like that. I consider it to be kind of like a spiritual nursery. um, we didn't really know anything, we didn't have any understanding or any background, but we were content. There was no problems, and there never could be any problems, and we just kind of existed like that. And I have no idea how long that lasted for. But that was how we existed. And periodically, there would be some kind of gift or a treat, or there was something that would come down for all of us. As a kid, it reminded me of getting a cookie, only it wasn't a cookie. It was just some sort of gift that we were glad to get, like a little treat. Anyway, um, one time there was these gifts would like come down to all of us, and one time there was one fewer gift or treat than there were souls in our group. And so I made the conscious effort that I was going to pass up my gift, because I knew that all these other souls were just like me, and I would let them have it, and I would go without, because I knew that they wanted this treat as much as I did. And when the last treat went to the last soul, I was very, very gently lifted up out of that group. And the care with which I was lifted was really noticeable. Like it was very gentle. And at the same time, a higher level of consciousness contacted me, like mind-to-mind communication or telepathy, and communicated that what I had done by giving up this gift, that was very important, and it indicated that I was ready um, to to go through something, like I was ready for to begin some sort of process. And I didn't think it was a big deal what I had done, but this higher level consciousness, which I'll call God for simplicity, um, told me that it was a big deal and it was important. That giving up something that I wanted for those around me was very important. And this higher level consciousness said that it was my creator, that I had been made, and I was very much loved and cherished and important. And, not just that I was important, but that all of us were important, and that we were all loved very, very much, and that there was a wonderful existence in store for us, but that we were new and inexperienced, and we needed to go through some kind of process, or that there was something we had to go through so that we would be able to fully appreciate and enjoy our existence. That how we were at that point, we couldn't appreciate all the wonders and fantastic happiness that was out there for us. And essentially, what was explained to me that God was, loving, compassionate, kind, honest, forgiving, respectful, like all these positive traits. Like that's what God is, and that we were created with free will. And for us to really enjoy our existence, we needed to freely choose those exact same those same traits for ourselves. We needed to choose to be humble, accepting, loving, kind, compassionate, to serve others, to have self-control and restraint, to have integrity, that kind of thing. Like we were, and this was really important. Like that, God really stressed that we were created to have free will, and that everything, this education we were all going to get, was centered around this idea that we have free will, that we were not created to be mindless slaves doing exactly what God wanted, but we were created that we would make our own choices and have our own consequences, and that this training that God had made for us would allow us to choose those godly traits for ourselves, because we would be able to learn the good and the bad of making different choices, and eventually we would all choose these godly traits for ourselves through our own free will, and that God wasn't going to force us. And I asked God, couldn't you just change me? Can't you just make me like that? Like this sounds like a difficult experience. Can't you just change me and all of us so that we could just enjoy our existence without going through this? And God's response was, absolutely. God was fully capable of forcibly changing us, but God wasn't going to do that because he respected our free will too much, and that our free will is very important, and he wasn't going to trample that, even though it would temporarily make things easier. And so I understood and accepted that. And God then asked, would you like to see my face? And so I said, okay, sure, that sounds good. And so my attention was turned away from this group of souls that I had been looking at, and my vision was turned towards this huge sun-like entity, and it had millions and millions of souls all like together, and they existed in extreme happiness, and all of them were like a small piece of this larger sun. And taken as a whole, like each little piece contributed to the overall face, and each individual maintained their own face, but at the same time, it was like they were part of something much bigger than themselves. Anyway, a couple of the souls that were in this group, they kind of like came to the surface to say hi to me, to welcome me into existence, and it was like a hardship for them, not a hardship, but like it was a reduction in their happiness to take their attention off of what they had been doing to focus their attention on me instead, because it decreased their happiness a little bit. Anyway, they were all very excited that I was going to join them someday, because they said essentially that every soul that joins them, it increases the happiness of everyone. Like there's something unique and irreplaceable about each soul. And so that when I would join them, I would bring something to the overall whole that no other soul could replicate, and it would increase their happiness a little bit. And it seemed like that's the case with every soul, that every soul is unique and irreplaceable, and that when we're done with this, what I would call training, and we reach our happier end stage, that we will contribute something that no other soul could, and make everyone else a little bit happier. Anyway, they understood what I was about to go through, and they knew it would be difficult, but they also assured me that someday I would join them. And God asked me, are you sure you're willing to go through this process? And I want to add that God was absolutely confident about this plan that he had for how we were going to get our education. The confidence was it was like it's palpable. You could feel this confidence. He was absolutely sure that this was a good plan, a good idea, and that he had thought through everything to the most microscopic detail, and that everything was tweaked to perfection. And this was a good plan, and he was extremely confident. And I agreed. I said, okay, yeah, I'm willing. I will go through this. And in an instant, it's like I was shot away from uh, the scene at a high speed, like I was zooming somewhere else. And God was still like in contact with me, mind to mind communication through telepathy. And we started looking at all these different places I could go where I could get get the experience I needed. Essentially, there was thousands and thousands of different planets that I could go to and live a physical life like this, where I could get the experience that I needed to learn what I needed to learn and complete my education. And we looked at all kinds of different planets that I could go to, and it's important to point out that my intelligence, my ability to comprehend and like understand an entire planet, like I could understand that very quickly, way faster than we can here while we're living as people. So we could go through all these different possibilities very, very quickly, or at least it felt very, very, very fast. Um, anyway, eventually we came to we saw the Earth, and there's something about Earth or people or this life or being here at this place. Something about it really fit perfectly for me, and I was absolutely positive this is where I want to go. This is the planet I want to go to. And God asked me if I was sure, and I said, yes, I'm sure. This is where I want to go. And with that, the decision was made, and it's like I was off to start, living on Earth. And with that, my question was answered, and I was back to floating in my neighbor's backyard. I like that memory ended, and I was back to being a unincarnated soul floating around in my neighbor's backyard. And so I started to have more questions. I wanted to know, okay, well that answered my question. I understand why I'm here on Earth, and I kind of understand what I am. But why am I living this life as Aaron? Like why am I this person? Like, how did that happen? And again, the memory of how I became Aaron was replayed for me, and I got to see, what led me to become this person. And so this memory, so the first memory that I just described, that was like before I had ever come to Earth. But this next memory, it was clear that I had been to Earth many times, and that I was much more experienced. Like I had been around the block, and this experience started, or this memory started as I was working with my guides to plan out an upcoming life. And during the beginning of this memory, I was I would say a frustrated soul, or disheveled. Like I wasn't in a good state. I was kind of like confused and unhappy with myself. I was frustrated, and these guides were trying to help me. They were trying to help me get me back on track, get me um, straightened out, I guess, so to speak. And they wanted me to come back to Earth. And I basically said, no, I don't want to go back to Earth. I'm just going to stay here. And I think here was in some sort of spiritual realm that's kind of like a halfway between, I don't know, it was like a transition realm. It wasn't a kind of realm that a soul is supposed to stay at. Like it was just meant to like transition from one place to the other. And they basically said, that would be a big waste. You know, you would stay, basically, if I stayed like that, which I could, it was my decision. But if I stayed like that, I would stay frustrated and mentally disheveled and unhappy with myself. But that by coming back to Earth, they would like that experience would get me back on track. It would put me in a better state. And I understood that, but I still didn't want to go back to Earth. And I said, you can't make me. And my guides agreed. They said, yes, you're right. We can't make you, but let us show you some of the souls that you could help if you do go back to Earth. And they said, would it be okay if we showed you some of the souls that you would help if you went back to Earth? And I said, well, okay, I guess that's okay. And so they showed me that, hey, here are some souls, here's some people that you would help if you went back to Earth. And when they told me that, I thought, okay, maybe this would be okay. Maybe I could consider this. I like the idea that maybe I could help someone else, and I like the idea that I could get myself straightened out, not remain in that frustrated, agitated state that I was in. So my guides and I transitioned to some kind of slightly different realm, or I don't know, there's some kind of transition, but they showed me a life that I could lead. They had something planned out, and they wanted me to, they suggested that I lead this life. And essentially, I would have become a very angry person. The life that they had for me, I think the person had a very difficult childhood, and that would affect them to where they would be a very angry adult. And for my entire life, if I had accepted that, I would have been a very angry person, and I would have spent my entire life trying to work against that anger. And I think that might sound pretty bad from a human perspective, to be an angry person your whole life, but from a spiritual perspective, it's like the soul constantly struggling against that anger. It has the effect of pacifying them, because they're constantly working against being angry. They're constantly having to control themselves and not act out on that anger. And so spiritually, it would have been like a lot of growth in that way. But I rejected that life. I said, I'm not going to live that life. No, there's no way. And my guides respected that. They said, okay, well, let's look at some other possibilities. And so we looked at a different family that I could be a part of. And we took a close look at, what the parents looked like, what the situation was, where it was. Essentially, I had lived many lives before this, and I had made enough contributions to society that I had, I guess, earned the right to have a say in the matter. To be more picky and choosy about what family I would have, and where I would be. Like how much I had done in the past, my contributions to society, they now played a role in what kind of options were available to me. Not all souls have the same options available to them. It kind of depends on how much you've contributed. Like the more you contribute, the more options you have, kind of thing. Anyway, this family, it seemed like a nice family, so we took a closer look, and it's safe to say I had a really, really good understanding of what these parents were like, what the son that they already had was like, and if I joined this family, what that would look like. So we started looking at what kind of bodies were available. And initially, I think I had maybe been a violent person in a past life, and I was really concerned about, I didn't want to hurt anybody. That was a big concern of mine as I was picking a body. But I wanted to be a girl because I felt like girls were less likely to hurt others. And I saw that these parents had the genes available that they could have a redheaded girl. And so I really wanted to be a redheaded girl. Somehow that really appealed to me. Like I knew that was kind of an unusual hair color. And I like that. I like the idea of having a rare hair color. And I like the idea of being a girl because I felt like I'd be less likely to hurt anybody. But we started to look closer, and it became obvious that if I was a redheaded girl to these parents, I would be kind of socially awkward. I don't know if there weren't enough genes available or something like that, but it wasn't like the right fit for me. Somehow it didn't feel quite right. Like I would never be able to live the kind of life I wanted. I would be awkward, and I would never be able to get married. And it just didn't fit for what I was looking for. So we started looking at boys, and somehow the genes, the way they worked, there was even fewer options for a redheaded boy. So we started looking at other hair colors, and it turned out there was all kinds of options available for a brown-haired boy. And it soon became obvious that was just a better fit for me, to be a brown-haired boy. And so we started looking at what options were available, and I wanted to be a really, really good looking guy, like, one of the best looking guys on the planet. And um, I know some of you are looking at me and be like, well, I got some news for you, buddy. But anyway, uh, and that choice was available to me. I could have chosen to be a really, really good looking guy, but my guides pointed out, they said, okay, yes, that option is available to you, but if you make that choice, it's going to change the way your life plays out. Women are going to treat you differently. People are going to treat you differently. You're going to have certain options available to you as, one of the best looking guys on the planet that you wouldn't have if you were a more ordinary looking guy. And essentially, it was clear that there was a spiritual downside. If I was a really, really good looking guy and I was too promiscuous, there was a spiritual downside to that. And that was obvious. And that was unacceptable to me. I didn't want those, the downside that came with being really, really good looking. So we backed the attractiveness down to something that was that I considered a little bit attractive, but nothing, nothing extraordinary. And then we started looking at intelligence, and it was the same deal. I wanted to be like the smartest guy on the planet, just absolutely brilliant, like an Albert Einstein or a Aristotle or something like that. And my guides, again, they were like, yeah, you could choose that. That option's available with these parents. But if you make that choice, here's how you'll be. And they showed me I would develop to be a very arrogant, I would be isolated, like it would be difficult for me to make friends or work with other people. I would think that like everybody was dumb, and I would be arrogant, and I would also be an atheist. And so I realized that there was a lot of negative downsides to being extremely intelligent. And so just like we did with my looks, we backed the intelligence down to something intelligent, but nothing nothing extraordinary. Okay. I'm no Albert Einstein or anything like that. So when we reached the right level of intelligence and attractiveness, we started looking at other traits. Eye color, height, all this kind of stuff. Basically, I was able to pick what kind of body I wanted, and my guides were there to help me with the choices. And if I was going to make a choice that didn't make any sense or would have negative consequences for me, they would help point that out. And it's safe to say I knew what this body was going to look like down to the most intimate detail. I had a very good idea of the body I was going to choose and what it would be like. And one thing that's kind of interesting is my guides pointed out, hey, the genes are there for you to have a club foot. If you want to have a club foot, the genes are all right there. And so we took a look at that, and it wouldn't benefit my life. Like it wouldn't help me with my spiritual growth. It wouldn't help wouldn't help my parents or anybody I knew. It just kind of, there was no reason for it. And so we rejected the idea of me having a club foot, and instead I just have a standard foot, I guess you could say. So anyway, we picked the body that I would have. Oh, and if I could sidetrack just for a minute there, someone, a distant relative of mine, heard that story, heard about this clubfoot, and he contacted me. This is like a third cousin or something, a guy I'd never met before, and he told me that he had a sister who had a clubfoot, which I thought was really interesting. I'd never known that. So I guess it's in my family gene somewhere. But anyway, to get back on the experience, after we picked the body, then my guides had they had some plans for what they wanted to include in my life plan. Basically, they had some people they wanted me to help. So there was some different arrangements that were made. My guides worked with other guides, and they planned out different parts of my life, like people I would meet in life, a role I would play in someone else's life, and a role that they would play in my life. Like a lot of this was planned out by my guides and the guides of these other souls, such that there was times where I might play, I might be like a bad guy in their life, or I might be a good guy and help them. But it was like a lot of this stuff was planned out, where my impact on their life was known and it was planned for. And a lot of this stuff, like I needed to agree to, like my guides weren't going to force this on me. And so I agreed to all sorts of different arrangements with all sorts of different souls that sometimes I was helping someone else and sometimes they were helping me. But a lot of this stuff, it was planned out, and it was planned for all of our benefits, right? Like we were helping each other with our spiritual growth, our spiritual progression. And let's say I needed a little extra growth in some area, my guides might arrange for some specific experience during my life that would help me grow in that area. And same with these other souls that I was working with. So people I would meet in life, let's say they need to learn more compassion or something. Well, they might have some specific challenge designed so that they can learn more compassion. And there was all sorts of planning like that with me and a lot of different people I was going to meet in life. And anything that I was going to experience that was more difficult than some threshold, I would need to agree to it. Like my guides weren't going to force this on me. So they worked with me and other guides at a higher level, and we agreed to all kinds of different things. And there were some things that I didn't agree to that were then not included in my life plan. Then they showed me some other stuff they had planned for my life. They showed me specific incidences of lives that I had previously lived where I had done something. And in some of these situations, I had done something in the past life that it caused some consequences that I had not faced yet. And so I needed to face those consequences in this life. It's kind of like in a past life, I had written a check, and now I had to cash that check in this life. Or you could call it karma. You could call it whatever you want to. But there are things I did in past lives that were playing directly into the plan for this life, and that was very obvious. And I have a couple examples that were pretty straightforward. Like my guides showed me in a past life, I had gotten in a fight and I had beaten this guy up pretty bad. And I had been like a bigger, stronger guy, and the guy I beat up had been kind of smaller. And this is a fight I could have easily avoided. Like I could have easily walked away from this. There was no good reason for this fight, but I beat this guy up pretty bad. And at the time I had felt good about it. And my guides showed me that. And they basically explained that, hey, this is what you did in a past life. This was not called for. Now you need to experience what you did to this other guy. Now you need to experience it for yourself. And through this process, you're going to learn. Excuse me a second. You will learn that it's not good to beat up other people, essentially. And this was not a punishment. It's not something where they were, being mean to me about anything. It was just like a fact that here, you need to learn. Like what you did was inappropriate. Now you're going to learn about it. And there was a lot of things like that where, in the past, I had set the stage that now I had to receive what I'd previously given out. And that fight was a good example. Another thing they showed me was that sometime in the past, I had, I think this was a primitive society. We had been in some kind of battle with another tribe or something like that. And anyway, we had captured somebody, and we mistreated this person that we captured, and we killed them. And my guides showed me that now I was going to receive some of that mistreatment, or I was going to experience some of what that person had experienced. So they showed me that I was going to have one of my shoulders dislocated, and then later in life I would have another shoulder dislocated, and that was planned out. Like this was a deliberate plan so that I could learn, to treat other people better, essentially. Another thing they showed me was that in a past life I had some kind of addictive substance or drug that I had sold. I didn't use it myself, but I had sold it to somebody, and I knew that it was like ruining this guy's life, but I didn't care because it's like I was making money. And my guide showed me that was, completely unacceptable. And as part of the consequences of that, now I was going to have an addiction in this upcoming life. And so we kind of had some negotiation, and we worked it out that I would have an alcohol addiction in this life, and that was all planned. And there was other plans that were planned out, and decisions that were made about, what kind of job I would have, where I would work. It was all planned out that I would work at this Newport News shipbuilding where I showed you that aircraft carrier, the company I work for, like that was planned. And my relationship with a lot of my coworkers, there were some aspects that were planned out as well. One that I'll point out that I think is kind of interesting is in a previous life I had this friend. He'd been a good friend of mine. I don't have any idea when this life was, but I was friends with this other guy, and um, we worked it out. We planned it where we would be coworkers, and we wouldn't get along very well during this life. So even though we had been good friends in a past life, in this life we had been um, kind of at odds with each other. I kind of irritated him. He kind of irritated me, and we worked together for years. That was the plan for this life. Anyway, so my guides and I we planned out all kinds of stuff, and I had an agreement and the right to refuse things that I didn't agree to or things that I didn't want for my life. But we worked out what we felt like was the proper life for me, and all of this stuff would benefit me spiritually. Like it would help me to progress and grow in the way that I needed to. Um, it wasn't just happenstance, and there was a deliberate reason behind all these different decisions that we were making. It was for my benefit and or the benefit of those around me. Um, anyway, when we finalized all these decisions, my guide asked me again, are you sure you're willing to live this life? Let's take a look at the whole life, all these decisions we've made. Here's what your life's going to look like. Do you agree to it? And I said, I agree. And again, they asked me, are you sure? And with that, when I agreed the second time, it's like that was it. The decision was made, and I was off to lead this life. And I got to see the conception of this body from a spiritual perspective, not the physical perspective you might think of, but from a spiritual perspective, it was a very beautiful event when this body was created. Like there was a spiritual significance to it, and it was beautiful. And with that, my question had been answered, and so again, I was back to being in my backyard, floating around as an orb of faint light. Um, so then I had more questions. I wanted to know, okay, well, I've lived a number of lives. What have I been doing between lives? Like, what's it like when I'm not living on life, but I'm, between lives? What's that like? How does that work? And so they showed me a number of realms I had been in between lives and what that looked like. And it started with some negative realms that they showed me. Uh, Basically, these were memories that I had previously had that I'd forgotten as I was living this life as Aaron, and now all these memories came back to me. And um, at one point, I had been in what I think is commonly called the void, like a black space, where it was like inky blackness in all directions. And I remembered that, and then I saw that during one between life time, I had been in this horrible place. I had been kind of like a monster, and I was with others who were just like me, and we were all violent, and we just fought with each other constantly. And this had been my experience between lives at some point. And all we wanted to do was fight each other, kill each other, and dominate each other. And we existed like that for I don't know how long. And then eventually I stopped trying to fight with those around me. Instead, I tried to help one of these souls that was with me. And when I tried to help this other soul, an angel or being of light kind of swooped in from above and pulled me out and told me that when I wanted to help my neighbor, I no longer belonged in this place. And essentially, this angel or being of light, whatever it was, it explained that all of these different beings that were down there, none of them were stuck like that forever, that all of them would eventually get tired of fighting, and that they would all be able to leave that horrible existence at some point. And I saw some other realm that I had been in where it had been basically darkness. I was kind of standing around with some other souls who had left Earth, and we were all just standing around in darkness. And we were confused and lost, and we didn't understand what was going on. And there were higher level like beings of light that were going around trying to help us. And eventually I accepted that help, and they helped me transition to live another life. I also saw that you know between lives at some point I had been in some happy realms. One of these realms was it looked kind of like Earth, but it was much prettier. Um, the souls there were all very happy. It looked like they had a street, they had buildings, they even had a lamp post, I remember. And the souls there, they were living or they were existing very similar to how they had existed on Earth. It's like they had jobs they were doing, but they were very happy. It was like Earth, but with no problems at all. And then I saw this other realm I had been in, where it was like a city of light, where the buildings were made of like translucent light, and all the souls there were translucent, and you could kind of like see through them. And it was beautiful, and the souls there were really happy, like extremely happy. So I saw these different realms that souls exist in between lives, or where I had been between various lives. Um, anyway, that memory ended, and I was back to floating next to my body, and I had more questions, and there was more answers, but eventually this being of light came at me very quickly, like in a hurry, like there was an importance to him, and as, and I got a brief glimpse of this being. He didn't have a name tag. I would say angel, but I don't know. That's just my assumption. It wasn't clear exactly what this being was, but it was a being of light. It's absolutely beautiful. I couldn't begin to describe how beautiful this being was. And he told me, "You are not to leave your body." It was like I had done something wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to leave my body. Like I had um, done something I shouldn't do. And anyway, bam, like that, I was back in my body. And I stood up, and at that point, my brother had noticed that my body had just been lying there on the ground for maybe 30 seconds, and he had come over and started walking towards me at that point. But when I stood up, he was like, "Oh, he's okay," and he went back to play with my other friends. And I was confused, and I didn't fully understand what had happened. So I went home, and I tried to talk to my mom about it, but I wasn't even quite 6 yet, and I couldn't explain this to her. And also, as a kid, I had a speech impediment. I couldn't say certain words properly, so I had difficulty speaking, and I just could not explain this to her at all. And so, she was unable to help me understand this experience. But I would think about it every day for maybe 6 months, something like that, and try to understand what I'd experienced. And my guides came to me after about 6 months, and I could feel the mental communication, telepathic communication. It's like mind to mind communication. I knew exactly who it was, and essentially they told me a couple of things. They said um, they need to hide this experience from me, is what they said. It was interfering with my life. I wasn't able to live life as intended based on this knowledge that I had, and that it would prevent me from having faith in life because I had seen this stuff about God for myself. I could never develop faith. And I asked, why does that matter? Don't you want people to know about the spiritual side of things? And they said, yes, we do want people to know about the spiritual side of things. But for you specifically, it's important that you develop faith. And based on your knowledge from these experiences, you can't ever develop faith. It's like impossible. And so essentially I agreed that I would have my memory of this experience hidden, but that I would get it back when I was much older. And they also said that they needed to change my life plan in order for me to be able to properly handle this experience that I had. They would need to make some changes to my life plan to prepare me for what I had seen and experienced. And I didn't like that because it required some extra challenges or difficulties for my life. And so that was, to me, it was a negative. I didn't want to experience more difficulties, but I understood, and I trusted these guides. I understood what they were saying, and I trusted their judgment. And so I agreed that I would accept these additional hardships or difficulties that then prepare me to be able to understand and handle the experience that I had. Anyway, when I agreed to what they wanted, I didn't think about my experience anymore. I got older. I went through life as a teenager. I got in a fight and had my nose broken. Um, I'm sorry, I think I forgot to point out that was something that was planned out because I had gotten in a fight with another. I'm sorry, because I had beaten up someone in a previous life. It was planned out during this life that I would have my nose broken. And when that happened, I had no idea that this is something I had agreed to prior to life. But I got my nose broken when I was 12. That was a difficult experience. I had a big black eye for like a week, and I was in middle school, and lots of kids went out of their way to be mean to me. It was a difficult experience, and I had no idea that was something I had planned out. I got a little older, and I dislocated my shoulder, and that was kind of a difficult experience. I had no idea that was something I had agreed to. I went to Virginia Tech to get a degree in electrical engineering. Again, no idea that was something that was planned out before I was born. I went to work. I met coworkers. Lots of people that I now know, our interactions were planned out. But while I was going through all that, I had no idea that some of this stuff was planned out. Anyway, I got to be older, and when I was 36, I was reading a Newsweek magazine, and there was an article about Dr. Eben Alexander. He's a near-death experiencer and a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience basically while he was clinically brain dead. And anyway, he described that in his article, and I read that. And something about hearing about his experience, I accepted what he was saying on like a deeper level. Like I think I had maybe more faith than I had previously in life. I'm not exactly sure what, but somehow I accepted what he was saying, and somehow that triggered the return of my memories from when I was a kid. So between the time I was 6 and 36, I had no knowledge of my experience. But here now at 36, all sorts of memories came back to me. I understood a lot about my life and what had happened. And I'd say I got about half of those memories back right away, and then half of them kind of trickled in over the next year or so. But basically, my experience came back to me. And now as an adult, I could appreciate it on a deeper level. I had a more developed worldview, a better understanding of things, a better understanding of how the world works. And so I could appreciate and understand this experience on a level that I couldn't previously. So that's kind of the gist of my experience, but I wanted to go into a couple things before we do some questions. I wanted to share some stuff that I don't think it's talked about enough, but I think it's important with near-death experience and understanding God. So one thing is free will, just how important that is. From my experience, I saw that we were created simple and ignorant, but with free will. And that free will was critically important. That was very clear from what God had told me, that we were created and free will was a central part of our creation. And there's all sorts of consequences of that free will that affect how our lives work and how this whole system works. That's very important. But I just wanted to point out that importance of free will, and that our lives are planned out. We're not just tricked or trapped into being here. Like, so many details of our lives are worked out for our benefit. There's a reason for it. It's not just we're randomly here. It's like there's a plan, there's a process, there's a benefit to us for coming here. And that's all planned out. And I guess something else I wanted to talk about was that in my experience, I saw that this life, everything about this life is like an ugly reflection of the spiritual realms. And that's like a direct quote from my experience, that ugly reflection, the idea that all these concepts, all these, physical things on this planet, all of it's an ugly reflection of some concept in the spiritual realm. And so things that might seem like just an annoyance to us while we're living life, like there's a spiritual, there's some corresponding spiritual attribute that we're actually working on while we're going through life, and that's deliberate. if I can draw an analogy here, in the 1980s, there was this movie that came out called The Karate Kid, and this kid wanted to learn karate, so he goes to this master, Mr. Miyagi, who agrees, okay, he's going to teach this kid karate, and the kid's like, great, I'm going to learn karate. So the master has him wax his cars, and then he has him paint the fence, and this kid's getting mad because he's just spending his time waxing the car and painting the fence, and then the master has him sand his deck. And the master has him do all these chores, and the kid's getting really mad. And after a couple days, he loses his temper, and he's like, "I'm just you're just treating me like a slave. You're just having me do all these dumb tasks." And Mr. Miyagi says, basically shows him that these motions that the kid has been going through have actually been training him important karate concepts. So, but my point here is that God has played that same trick on us. God is pulling this Mr. Miyagi. As we go through life, as we do all this stuff in life, there's some corresponding spiritual lesson that goes to it. And the whole life is designed around that. So all this boring stuff, getting stuck in traffic, having to eat, all of it, it benefits us spiritually because there's a corresponding spiritual lesson tied to everything we're doing in life. Anyway, I just thought I'd point that out. Also from my experience, it seems pretty clear that we come back to multiple lives. We're not just it's not just one life and we're done. Like all of us need multiple lives to learn the lessons we need, to get the level of spiritual maturity that we need to really fit into these higher spiritual levels. And to fit into these higher spiritual levels, we need to be kind, compassionate, empathetic, honest, have self-control, have some integrity, that sort of thing. And that through repeated lifetimes, we're inevitably going to get that, because when we make a mistake, we receive the consequences of that mistake, and we learn from it. It's not just some mindless punishment. It's actually a learning opportunity for us. And then also when we do something positive, when we help somebody, when we do an act of service or give someone some money that maybe they need something like that. Anyway, that comes back to us also, but that is rewarded with interest. Like if we do something good in one life, it comes back to us with interest in another life. But between lifetimes, we're at different levels. Some souls who have really who have abused a life or mistreated other people, they might be in some unhappy place. But I think the majority of souls between lives, they spend time in a happier place. But none of that is permanent. I think that's something I think gets lost, is this idea that somehow there's this idea that we die and then we're just stuck like that wherever we are forever. But what I saw pretty clearly is that no soul is stuck anywhere forever, that every soul, when they're ready, they can continue to progress upwards, and that no souls are going to be forever discarded or lost or forever banished to some kind of horrible existence. Like the souls that or the people that really screw up and they torture others and kill and rape and all this stuff, those souls might have a very unpleasant experience after they die, but it's not permanent. It's not forever. So I just wanted to mention that. Also, we're not going to be coming back to Earth forever. There's an end to this. Eventually, we're all going to get to the point where we can just proceed to higher level realms, happier realms. This isn't some endless cycle. What I saw pretty clearly is that we're all going to end this cycle of lives, and then we're going to progress on to much better happiness. I wanted to point out what I saw about appearances in the afterlife, the way souls look in the afterlife. Here on Earth, the way I look doesn't really have anything to do with my internal spiritual nature. But in the afterlife, the way souls look is directly related to their internal nature. If you're a hateful soul that just wants to abuse and mistreat others, like you end up taking on this grotesque, ugly appearance. And if you're a loving, kind soul that wants to help others, you end up taking on a more attractive appearance. And that the way we look, how we appear in the afterlife, is directly related to what kind of soul we are. Another important concept I wanted to briefly mention was the idea of vibrations or levels. it was clear that every soul has like a vibration to them, and that as we become more loving and kind and compassionate, our vibration increases, and we move to higher and higher levels. It's not like there's one bad place for bad souls and one good place for good souls. It's more like a continuous level of a continuous number of different levels or vibrations. And as we go through life, we're actually increasing our vibration, increasing our love, and we're moving to higher and higher levels, gradually through our own actions. I wanted to point out that what I saw pretty clearly was that there's other worlds like the Earth where there's souls incarnated in some physical being, and they're learning the same kind of lessons that we are. But from my experience, it was clear that there's just thousands or probably millions and millions, just countless other worlds out there where there's beings like us who are living a life kind of like this, so that they can learn the same kind of lessons that we're learning. Love, compassion, kindness, integrity, that sort of thing. The other thing about my experience is what I was shown was that animals have a spiritual nature too. It's not just humans, but all these animals around us, that God has a plan for them as well. And I was directly told that there was 2 dogs in my life that I would like they were, our interactions were kind of like planned out or something. And anyway, I would be helping them with their progression. And so based on that, I feel like it's clear that animals have some sort of spiritual journey similar to ours, and that, we should be trying to be good to them as well. This idea that while we live this life, it feels like time is very concrete. Time flows, second by second. But my experience showed me pretty clearly that time doesn't quite work that way. The way I view it now is that for God, it's all kind of one. It's all one thing, and that God can make changes or tweaks to how our lives go across time. God isn't bound by time the way we are, and that time just fundamentally doesn't work the way we think it does. There's a different aspect to it, which kind of explains how God can, I guess, what we would say, know the future or change the past or something like that. It's just because time doesn't work the way we think it does. I wanted to briefly mention suicide. My guides showed me, and I don't know why they showed me this, but my guides showed me that in some past life, I had committed suicide in some primitive or prehistoric society. I had jumped off of a high cliff and killed myself. And my guides showed me that what I had done made life harder for those souls or those people that I had lived with, my family. And they explained to me that I would have to relive life again, a different life, and face those exact same challenges again and overcome them this time. And I would essentially have to keep facing this challenge until I could overcome it. But that I would need to face an even more difficult challenge the next time in order to overcome it. And basically, they explained that if we face some sort of challenge, let's just say everything we face can be ranked from 0 to 100 as far as difficulty. If let's say we face a challenge at a level 10 and we fail, then we're going to need to reface that challenge at a level 11. And it's kind of like facing and overcoming a more difficult challenge erases our failure at a lower level. But anyway, they explained that to me. And essentially, if a person is facing some kind of challenge or difficulty in life and they kill themselves, they're going to need to reface life again and reface those exact same challenges, but on a little bit more difficult level until they're able to overcome that. Anyway, sorry, I hope this is being received okay. I know I'm kind of droning on here.
Absolutely incredible. Please keep going.
Okay. Another thing I saw, I mentioned the vibrations, that there's a vibration to all of our souls, and there's all these different levels that our souls naturally fit in, because that level is at the same vibration that we're at. But that vibration, that cycle, it repeats over and over again. Here we have days and nights. There's a cycle that goes on and over and over again. We have summers and winters. There's a cycle that goes on, over and over. But I saw that in heaven, there's something similar. There's like a cycle to the way heaven works. There's periods of more intense happiness and then periods of less intense happiness. And so there's a cycle to heaven that goes back and forth over and over again. And the reason for that is that by not having the same level of happiness continuously, we're able to, or souls in heaven are able to enjoy an overall higher level of happiness. But there's some kind of cycle to these heavenly realms similar to our earthly cycles of day and night and summer and winter that we have here. Anyway, I just thought it was interesting, so I should point it out. Another concept that I would like to point out is there's kind of a idea in the world that people understand how God works and that God is unfair. They understand how it works and God is unfair, life is unfair. And I'd like to say, based on my experience, no. First off, none of us, nobody fully understands what God is up to. It's just impossible here in this physical realm. We all have some misunderstandings, but the big thing I wanted to say is that God is fair. Life in its own way is fair. And I know that it doesn't seem that way, but that's a deliberate illusion because it allows us to live life as intended. When it seems like life is unfair, we act in a more natural way according to our own free will. But the reality is that life is very fair, and those who are mistreating others or abusing others, they get a consequence for that. And those that are good to others, those that are helping people around them, they get a consequence for that as well. And the whole system through multiple lives, and if you take into account what we do in the afterlife, like it's all fair. It's perfectly balanced so that there's a fairness to the system that I think is not appreciated or understood very well. But I wanted to point that out. And then there's the question that pops up a lot. Why do bad things happen to good people? And I saw a little bit of that. I have a couple answers to that question. Some people might consider me to be a good person, but bad things have happened to me. And because I was able to see part of my life planning, I can answer that question. Why did bad things happen to me specifically? Assuming I'm a good person, But anyway, and I saw 4 specific reasons. One is some of the stuff, bad things that have happened to me in life are directly tied to what I had done in a previous life. So in some cases, I'm just receiving what I had previously given to others. And that works both on good ways and on bad ways. Another thing is some of the bad stuff that has happened to me, it was deliberately planned out because it was an experience that I needed to help me grow spiritually. It was like by facing this difficult situation or something bad happening to me, it would challenge my soul in just the right way that would cause me to grow or change in a way that would make me help me adopt these godlike characteristics that are so important in the spiritual realms. Another reason that bad things happen to me is I specifically agreed to some of this stuff because it would help other people. So some of the bad stuff that happened to me, it wasn't even about me. It was about something I agreed to that would help the other people in my life. It would help them to face some sort of challenge or have some sort of empathy for me. Somehow it would allow them to face what they needed to face or experience what they needed to experience so that they could grow spiritually in the way that they needed to grow. And then another reason, I forgot to mention this. Sorry. One of the unintended consequences of picking this body was that I would have really bad acne as a teenager. Like that wasn't something that was deliberately planned, but it was like a side effect or an unintended consequences of all these other decisions that me and the guides were making about this physical body. But that was a bad experience for me. That was negative. It was difficult. And the reason I went through that difficulty, it was kind of like it was an unintended consequence of other decisions, but it was necessary so that all these other decisions would work. So it's kind of like a unintended consequences. So those were 4 reasons why I saw that bad things happen to good people. But I'm sure there's others or something I'm leaving out that I'm not able to explain properly. Anyway, So that's the gist of the stuff I wanted to talk about. I hope that's okay. I've been joining on for a while here.
Oh, it's
That's okay.
absolutely fascinating. I mean, the level of detail that you've gone into is extraordinary. I mean, my goodness, that kind of recall, so much detail. I don't think I've heard an account that extraordinary before, actually. So I'm really hoping that you will, finish your book and publish it, because I think there's just so much there. And the extraordinary thing too is that strands of what you're saying resonate so much with, I think, and those of us who are on the spiritual path know about the near-death experience.
Right.
There are so many different strands that resonate with other people's stories and other things that we've come to learn that really serve to sort of confirm a
Right.
belief. Yours is very confirming in many respects for those of us who know a little bit about this and have heard snippets here and there. So I really encourage you to get that book out as soon as possible and apply to IANDS and really let a lot of more people know your experience. I've got some questions. Good grief. I mean,
Sure.
encourage
Yeah,
everything.
I've tried really hard to go into some of the details of my experience because I feel like it's important to kind of get into some of those details.
Well, that's what makes it fascinating and incredibly rich because it really flushes out a lot of questions I think that many of us have. It helps sort of put a whole picture together in terms of the reason for being here and why we
Right.
experience what we experience. So phenomenal, for sure. I just want to start with something very basic. When you were, close to 6 years of age, you had this breathing difficulty, you died for a short time, presumably, and you sense yourself, you see yourself as an orb in this area. And I love the graphic that you put together, by the way. But any of us who started our journey fascinated by ghosts and ghost hunting and all that kind of thing, and all the photography that's done with 3D cameras and everything else, they always talk about these orbs, don't they?
Right.
Kind of flying through a scene in the dark, and oh, look at that orb. And now you basically have kind of confirmed what we believe, and that is that you were a spirit in an orb. And so those orbs are spirits that people encounter in ghostly situations, right? For whatever, depending on the circumstance. But it's really interesting. I've not heard that sort of confirmation from the inside out before. So
Okay.
for sharing that. That was
that's just that's what I look like. I was a round orb of consciousness during parts of that experience.
for God to actually ask you, "Do you want to see my face?" That isn't something that we hear about all the time. Often it's very much the opposite. You never get to see the face. You might see the shoulder, the arms, the hands, but not the face. And then you describe it very eloquently in terms of like a sunlight, a sunlit entity, and that there are millions of souls that have come together to form that overall picture, that overall entity. And that each one contributes to the whole. What came to mind there was, those composite photographs that we can see now, where it's one, if you take a look from a distance, you see the person's face, but when you look independently, they're each individual pictures of other people that make the. So isn't that beautiful? And
right. Yeah, that's a perfect description. Like
it is, isn't it?
Like, I now view the face of God as the face of everyone we ever see. Like all of those put together, like that's God.
Right. Exactly. What I loved about what you said is you talked about, free will. Okay, I'm just trying to go through my notes. I was taking copious notes so that I wouldn't forget. But every soul, you said every soul who joins. Then you went on to talk about how every soul joins a group, and there was a uniqueness about the situation. I think some souls came to you, and you knew that you would join them at some later date.
Oh, right.
It's almost as though they're in this kind of much higher level, perhaps gone through a lot of experiences. You were kind of signing up, putting your hand up to start to go through some experiences. And you kind of knew that once you'd gone through your experiences, at some point you would graduate and you would be back with them.
Right.
But you also talked about, the life plan and God having a lot of confidence in a particular life plan. So we have free will. We can opt to go into a life, but it sounds as though those lives are really designed by our guides and by the other side, from what you're telling us.
Well, with our input, we're part of that. The way I saw it was we're like a key member of that planning. Like they don't like plan it and then put it on us. Like we're part of that planning with our guides. Like we work as a team to plan out something that works.
Well, you were also saying that at one point you were, part of this sort of, I forget exactly the term you used, you're almost sort of part of an ocean, an individual droplet in an ocean, and that there was a treat. Periodically, there'd be treats that would be given out to each soul, and you deliberately chose not to go without the treat.
Right.
For some other soul to get the treat. And in some respects, that sort of made you shine amongst the group. You stood out amongst the group. Maybe that was your way of volunteering to be,
right.
You were ready to join the parade, as it were, to have a life experience, to be able to grow and to learn. And that free will was very much part of that. But it was almost as though the experiences were ones that allow us to become worthy. It's almost as though these experiences that are put out there are very well thought out. There's a lot of value intrinsic in those experiences. And if one can go through them and sort of succeed, if you will, pass the tests, one is bringing back a lot to the collective.
Right.
Everybody gets to grow exponentially as a result of individual experiences. We all kind of grow from them. But there's a sense of worthiness. There has to be a worthiness to the experience. Right. It's not a trivial experience that you're being offered, that we're being offered by the sound of it. It's one that really is worthwhile and well thought out.
Yeah.
Everybody can grow and learn. We're not here to waste our time, as it were.
Right. Yeah, it's not like we're just randomly here. Like there's a plan for it, and there's a benefit to us for being here. Mm-hmm. And then like you said, it's like God can't just give an immature soul this happiness. It just doesn't work. It's like we have to work for ourselves to get those loving, kind traits that are so critically important for us to enjoy heaven.
Right. It's almost as though you have to go through the hardships to really know the value of when something is good, perhaps, that right. Contrast. And as very young souls, we don't have that experience.
Right.
Right. And I think you said you asked God, well, why can't I just be there? Why can't I just kind of graduate to that level without going through all the challenges? And I think he said you could, but it wouldn't be as flavorful. It wouldn't be as enjoyable because you don't know what love is until you've experienced, hate, perhaps, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling on, but I'm just really excited because there's just so much richness to what you've been sharing today. Now, one of the things was you were shown many, many different planets, many different kinds of existence. You chose Earth. Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those other planets and some of those other existences were that you could have chosen?
Right. Yeah, I wish I could. I wish I had the memory of what beings look like or what it was like, but I don't. I have no idea. But I have heard other near-death experiencers describe that. Howard Storm comes to mind. He describes that he asked a question like that, and he according to Howard Storm, he was shown, a whole bunch of different beings on different planets and what they look like. So I can't answer that question, but I think there are other experiencers who have seen that kind of thing and can answer that question.
Right. You also talk about how you had memories of, being potentially, you talked about a frustrated soul, a confused and unhappy soul, and that your guides wanted you to go back to Earth and that you were shown how you could help other people. And then you talked about, a particular life where you would be a very angry adult. Thank you. You'd be a very angry adult pretty much through your entire life. You chose not to go to that life. But one thing that I thought was very interesting is that you'd spend your entire life working through that anger.
Right.
So, this resonates with someone that we had on the program last month, as a matter of fact, with her guide, Melissa Gates Perry and Aralam. And she talked about how, we choose certain life lessons and we go through that pain. But the other half of the story that often is not spoken about is how we work through that and then come through the other end and resolve it.
Right.
So,
yeah. We go through these hardships, but there's a reason for it. Like there's a benefit to us. And they're specifically tuned for our benefit. And that I think that's sometimes lost. Like we think we're just going through some kind of hardship for no good reason, but there's an excellent reason, a perfect reason. It perfectly fits with our soul and what we need for our development.
Absolutely, yeah. There are two parts to the experience, not just the hardship, but also the working through and coming.
Yeah.
Well, I love what you said about the different families. You were exposed to a family. You wanted to become. You didn't want to be violent. You wanted to be a girl because you'd been violent in a previous incarnation.
Right.
It was as though if you were a girl, somehow, I'm getting inundated with questions here, so I'm going to switch to the audience questions in just a second. But you were, you thought it'd be safer to be a girl. You'd be kinder, as it were. And then the fascination with the red hair, becoming a red-headed girl. But then that led to being socially awkward. And somehow it just wasn't going to be a life that you thought you wanted to take. Does that mean that that life might be offered to some other soul? I'm assuming that there's a vacancy then. If you don't take it, somebody else might be able to.
So for the one life where I would be an angry person, I got the feeling that somehow that was like a pre-planned life, and they needed somebody to take that life, and that somebody would. And of course, they would be a different soul living that life, so that the details would be a little bit different, but someone would pick that life. For being a redheaded girl, that was specific to me looking at the options for my current parents. So there wasn't like someone else would be taking that life.
Gotcha. Okay. And then you talked about past lives and that there were consequences to that. And often consequences, in other words, there's connectivity across lives through past.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an interesting concept because often we are told that everything's happening at the same time, which is hard for us to conceive. But the fact that things have consequences, which means that there's a sort of a knock-on effect, which suggests that there's a timeline, that there's a past, present, and a future to this is interesting as well. So that's kind of mind-boggling. How can everything be happening at the same time when yet there are consequences across lives? And one bears out a particular behavior because of what happened in a past incarnation.
It feels like a paradox, and I can't quite come up with a good way to explain it, but I think both things are true. That this is all simultaneous, but our actions do have consequence. So it's like both of these things are true.
And you talked about in the past life being a bigger guy and beating up a smaller guy, and just doing it for the heck of it and enjoying it, and that the consequence, the knock-on effect or the karma in this particular lifetime is that you would get a dislocated shoulder, get a bloody nose, or get a broken nose, so that you would experience some of, I guess, perhaps what you did to the other person in some way.
Right. Yeah, and it's not a punishment. It's like that's how this system is designed. And by experiencing that, now I will have more compassion. I'll be more peaceful. I won't want to repeat that again. And through repeated iterations of that, we all learn, hey, it's a whole lot easier and better if we're nice to people, if we help other people, and we don't want to go through these consequences that we face if we hurt other people. And through repeated lifetimes, everyone learns to be good to others. And then when we freely adapt that kind of trait for ourselves of loving, kind, compassionate, honest, all that kind of stuff, then we're ready. We're prepared. We're able to properly fit into those higher realms where that's just the mindset of everyone there. If you took a, a hateful being or a hateful soul that just wanted to hurt others, and you put them into one of these higher levels, they wouldn't fit in it at all. It just doesn't work. God couldn't just force them in there because it would like violate their free will. So instead, he provides these lives where they can freely change themselves and become better souls, so that they will naturally fit into the higher levels, heavenly realms.
And interesting, the example you also used about addiction, how in a past life you got people addicted and did it for the money and didn't care essentially
Right.
about these individuals. And then the knock-on effect in this lifetime is one experiences an addiction oneself and just how
Right.
incredibly difficult that is. Do you think that one can knock an addiction in one lifetime, or do you think it can take more than one lifetime? Because addiction is really hard to come back from.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's. I couldn't give one answer for everybody, but I saw pretty clearly that these physical addictions of alcohol or drugs, they have a spiritual. There's like a spiritual side to it, and somehow it's incompatible with the higher heavenly realms. So we really need to beat whatever addictions we're facing here in this lifetime, or here in this physical reality. Otherwise, it's going to cause problems for us when we turn to the spiritual realms. I saw very clearly, my guides explained this to me, that if I didn't beat my alcohol addiction during this life, I would have to face addictions again in future lives. Like I would have to reface an even more difficult addiction in a future life until I could overcome it. And I think that's probably true with everybody else. If they're not able to beat their addiction during this life, they may be back on Earth again in the future facing a more challenging addiction, and they're going to keep that's just going to keep happening until they do what they need to do to beat their addictions.
We hear so much about drug overdoses these days, and obviously that's, for a lot of people, that is an addiction. Do you think that the overdose and the actual passing from the overdose is part of the life plan?
That's a great question. I don't know. It seemed to me that I had this plan laid off, but I was told that I always have free will. I will always maintain free will, and so I think we can go off of our primary life plan and and start doing other stuff. So I couldn't answer that question for every person. I imagine some of them that is like their primary life plan, but some people I think maybe that's not their what I would consider their primary plan.
Right. You also talk about life between lives, as it were, life between life, and you talk about the different realms, and that was very interesting. How in one of them
Right.
there was an inky blackness, and another one, I believe, you were a monster, very very violent, and with a lot of very violent um,
Right.
entities. I guess it sounds very hellish. It sounds a little bit like Howard Storm's hellish, the first part of his experience, which
Okay.
was incredibly hellish. But then at the same time, at some point, you wanted to help another soul in that environment, and an angel pulled you out of it. That's what made me think
Right.
about Storm's experience. So, as you said towards the end of your talk, nobody has to stay in a situation forever. It just depends on the individual's want, will
Right.
to seek help, or to want, or maybe by just helping another soul in that
Right.
environment, that's enough to kind of get you out of that situation.
Yeah. A couple of things I wanted to point out there is, in every one of these levels, all the souls there were like each other. We're going to end up with souls who are just like us. So it's better if we behave ourselves in a way that we'd want to be around people who act that same way. Um, but yeah, like none of these souls are stuck like that forever. Every one of them will be able to progress and move out of it. But I mentioned the day and night and the summer and winter, that cycle to things, and I think it's the same with these lifetimes. We live a lifetime, and then we spend time, so to speak, in the afterlife. And I think it goes back and forth. And we don't necessarily have to just come right back to earth immediately. Like we can enjoy our, have some happiness in the afterlife between lives. Like we don't have to come back right away. And I think that's kind of a choice that the different souls make.
When you talked about the between lives, you talked about two examples of very negative realms, and then you talked about two other examples, following examples of much more positive realms. Do you think that there was a progression, or do you think they happened did you have a negative, positive, negative,
Okay, right.
negatives to positives? Was there any kind of rhyme or reason?
Right. So I think the way our spiritual progression works is very much like the stock market. Have you ever seen a stock market graph where generally it goes up, but then there's like some downward spikes, or sometimes there's some upward spikes, but the general trend is upwards, but sometimes there's some corrections. And I think our spiritual progression is just like that, where we're generally moving in the right path, but sometimes we just screw up. And I think that that's what I did in a previous life, maybe my last life, whereas I just totally screwed up. And um, that's kind of how I see it.
Okay. Let's switch to a sort of another segment, another whole consequential part of your talk here, and that is when your guides came to you after 6 months of having this experience. So you're still very, very little. And they told you a couple of very significant things. And one was that they needed to hide your experience, otherwise you wouldn't develop faith.
Right.
So your memory had to be hidden. And the second thing was that they needed to change your life plan in some way and include some additional difficulties, which you ended up accepting, probably not rather reluctantly, but you accepted anyway. I've not heard that before. That's really interesting. That suggests that somehow maybe the near-death experience that would have been part of your life plan, but maybe the near-death experience and the way you interpreted it made them come back and want to change things, which is interesting because things constantly be changed by the sound of it. It's not just sort of, okay, off and you're on this trajectory and there's not going to be really a change.
Right. Yeah, I guess a couple things. One is I view the life planning process as not necessarily before we're born, but more like it's outside of time. And so it's like these lives are being planned almost concurrently because as you said, everything is like simultaneously happening. So I can't quite wrap my mind around it. But the way I view this near-death experience for me is I don't think it was a life plan that my guides had. I don't think it was something that we had planned out. But I think that probably at higher levels above my guides, there's our guides, but then there's stuff going on at higher and higher levels that I don't really understand. I think at higher levels that this experience might have been planned out, but that me and my guides did not understand or plan it out. So I feel like this was probably at some kind of deeper, higher level that I can't quite wrap my mind around.
Right. Okay. And then you talked about the concepts that you've learned from this experience, some of the takeaways, as it were. Appearance in the afterlife. You said it's here. People have a physical appearance, and it's only when you get to know the person that you sort of see who they really are, as it were, from the side. But over there, that appearance is actually related to their internal nature.
Right.
And so the more evolved spiritually the person, presumably the more beautiful they actually are in appearance, more light. That's really...
Yeah. And all these different realms I was describing, the way the beings there looked, it matched the quality of the realm. It's not like you have really beautiful souls in terrible realms or really atrocious looking souls in terrific realms. It's like the quality of their spiritual nature matched their outward appearance, and it matched the quality and happiness of the realm they were in. Like it all fits together perfectly. And we can't put on lipstick or spiritual makeup or anything like that. We're kind of, how we look is directly related to our internal nature. And another thing I wanted to point out, this I talked about this being of light I saw at one point, or angel, whatever it is. This being was translucent, like you could see into them. If you lie and you cheat and you try to hide stuff, like you in the spiritual realm, you would have more of an opaque appearance, but someone who's honest, loving, trusting, and they're not trying to hide anything. It's like you can see into them, into their deeper being, and there's like a deeper spiritual meaning to the way these beings of light look. You could, here on Earth we have facial features, eyes and nose and stuff, and you can see if someone's mad or happy or whatever. But in the spiritual realm, looking at one of these beings of light, it's like you can see into them, and there's a much deeper, more meaningful significance to these internal characteristics or internal traits that they have that you can just see, and it's absolutely beautiful. I don't know if I'm doing it justice, but there's a beauty to these spiritual beings, these beings of light, that is hard to describe, but it's just absolutely beautiful.
And you also talked about vibration, how every soul has vibration, and that with love, the more love, the more the vibration increases. Can you,
Right.
it's a very abstract concept, but can you try to describe that a little more? And is it related to that appearance that you were talking about, that internal nature, or is it a different thing altogether, the vibration?
Yeah, I think it all kind of fits together. The way I view it is that God is like the ultimate vibration. I would consider God to be the sum of all of our vibrations put together. But there's an internal characteristic, of vibration to each of us that is related to how loving and kind and compassionate we are. And as we grow in terms of love, compassion, forgiveness, that kind of thing, we actually increase our vibration. And that just directly affects what kind of level we fit in at, is that vibration. And a being like a low level soul, if they tried to go to a higher level vibration realm, it wouldn't work. They would be extremely uncomfortable there. They wouldn't fit in right. It would be unpleasant for them, and they would naturally want to leave and go back to their own vibration. And I don't know how much this translates or how easy it is to understand, but that vibration is a key concept, and it's like just an integral part of our existence in the afterlife that I think it's worth mentioning.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about animals. You said that they have a spiritual nature, and God has a plan for them, and they
Right.
feel that you're an integral part of your pet's progression. Can you be a little bit more specific about that?
Yeah. So the detail I have from my experience is directly related to two dogs I would have. I was essentially told that there's two dogs that were going to be in my life that like I would play an important part in their spiritual progression. And like from that, I'm extrapolating and saying, hey, look, it's not just people, it's animals too. I don't view there's something as unique or different about these two dogs that I'm going to have. I think that's pretty standard for all the dogs and other animals in the world, that all of them have their own, like they're going through their own spiritual journey. And another thing that my guides had told me was related to a past life where I had been starving, and I had seen some geese flying overhead. And after I died, I asked my guides about it, and I don't know why I have this memory, but I do. And my guides told me that they couldn't just, I said, hey, look, I was starving. Why didn't you just send these geese down so I could eat them? And the guides had told me that those animals had their own spiritual journey. Like they had their own objectives and plans to carry out for their spiritual journey, and that they couldn't just send them down for me to eat them because it would interrupt their spiritual journey. And so, putting those two together, it's clear to me that animals have their own path, their own, they've got their own journey that they're going through, their own spiritual nature. And I don't totally understand it or how it correlates to us. I'm just saying, hey, it's there. Animals have a soul, a spiritual nature similar to ours, and that we should treat them well also. This idea of loving others and being good to others, it doesn't just extend to people, it also should extend to animals.
I won't get into the whole vegetarian issue, but we bypass that. But yeah, you talk also about time, God's time being obviously very different from ours.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit to that in terms of it sounds as though, we see time as obviously being linear and there's not much we can do about it. Um,
Right.
day, night seasons and years go by and there it is. We have no control over it. But God can presumably manipulate, change. How can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. So I'll try. I find this very difficult to try to describe because I don't understand it perfectly at all myself either. But so there's something called Schrodinger's cat. I don't know if you ever heard of this. It's a principle in physics that this physicist Schrodinger came up with that says there's this subatomic particle that it exists in superposition. It has like two states, and like when you observe it, you're going to only observe one state, this state or that state. But that until you observe it, it actually exists in what's called superposition. It exists in two states at once. And so the way I view it is like if you just take one person, you think about yourself, God doesn't need to plan for your life. God doesn't need to plan how any of the other stuff in the world um, uh, affects it until it actually does affect it. Like if you think about the weather on the other side of the world, that doesn't affect you right now. And so God doesn't need to make that a specific quantity. It can exist in super position. It can exist in multiple states until it affects you. So when God's planning your life or all the little details around it, God can manipulate all this kind of stuff as long up until that last second when it actually affects you. And if you expand that into everyone in the world, you'll see that, hey, there's some events that from a clock point of view, they've already happened. But from God's point of view, maybe God hasn't made that a specific outcome yet. And God doesn't need to until it affects you. And so God can manipulate events across time in that way and seemingly make changes in the past, even though from God's point of view, it's all at the same time anyway. So it doesn't quite work the way we might think it does. Um,
Yeah, well, I'm sure synchronicities are in there as part of all of that as well. The extraordinary nature of how something will just show up in a particular way at a particular time when you most need it, if you
yeah,
will.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like God can manipulate those little events very easily. It might seem really convoluted and difficult for us, but for God, it's all easy and straightforward. And
Yeah.
so if there's some specific event that's needed to push someone in the right path on their life plan, then God can certainly do that. And you might think that, well, God could then, change things to make my life easier, so I don't ever have to face any kind of hardship. But, we're not here to avoid all hardship. We're here for our spiritual progression. And so sometimes we're going to get pushed and pulled a certain way, even though it might be difficult for us, but it's what our soul needs for its progress.
And you also touched on suicide. And what I haven't heard before, I've heard the notion that, um, it does impact other people's lives very significantly. You are impacting other people's free will. You're opting out of the game early, as it were. What I
Right.
haven't heard, and that you have to sort of live out, you have to wait until all these people that whose lives you've affected because of your suicide kind of live out their lives and the consequences of all of that. So it can take a very long time, like Earth time, for all of that to play out. What I haven't heard is you come back and face even harder challenges. I've heard that you come back and if you choose to, presumably free will is there, but you may choose to face some of the same challenges because you didn't learn the lessons the first time.
Right.
But I didn't hear that they might be even more difficult. They may be greater challenges than the first time around.
Yeah, that's something that my guides had told me was that uh, you know th- they explained it to me in like a millisecond, and it was perfectly easy to understand. But here on Earth, when I try to re-explain it, I find it much more difficult.
Oh,
Um, and the best explanation I can come up with is if you look at our difficulties and rank from 1 to 100, if you fail at a level 9 difficulty, you can erase that failure by overcoming that challenge at a higher level. It's like it negates that failure that we had. And suicide is one of those examples where, if it's essentially it's a spiritual failure. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. Nobody should think that ending their life is going to make things easier. But essentially, we're going to have to reface those same challenges, but at a slightly harder level. And also, we're going to need to experience those negative consequences that we've put on all of those people around us. It's basically, it makes our journey a lot more difficult if we end our life prematurely.
Okay. Just one other quick thing. I love what you said about this idea that, God is unfair, life is unfair. Why do bad things happen to good people? A lot of people use, that as a reason not to believe in God. How could God allow the Holocaust, disease, so on and so forth to occur? Your point here is that, and I think Anita Moorjani talks about this as well, the idea that from this vantage point, this earthly body in this place and time, we can only see one tiny slither, one tiny corner of a huge, very intricate, finely woven together tapestry.
Right.
And, God, the universe source, sees, knows, is part of that greater tapestry, the creation of that greater tapestry. And when all of that is taken into consideration, and God is good and life is fair, because there are all the checks and balances, the goods and the bads, to ultimately benefit individuals, to benefit the collective.
Yeah.
So I love the way you put that. I thought that was very eloquent. Lots of other questions. To what extent can you plan your life and know what will happen? Because once you incarnate, free will trumps everything, right?
Right.
Something's happening no matter what. Example, an affair, a spiritually transformative experience, or a broken nose, a nose break.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. We maintain free will. That was told to me very straightforward, that during life I will always maintain free will. I can always, I could move to Mozambique out of the blue and my guides won't stop me. But I think the way this works is they subtly influence us to try to keep us on our main plan, and that by doing so, they don't violate our free will, but they're trying to help us. They're trying to keep us according to plan as much as they can without violating our free will. And that if we're able to, accept that guidance and stick with our plan, that's how we get the most benefit out of life. But even if I went completely off script and did something completely unplanned, that's okay. That's part of our the nature of living here on Earth, that everything's going to be okay, even if I go off script and do things differently than I'm supposed to. That's just part of how we learn, and that's part of how we progress, and that's all okay. And that, God has figured this out. I don't have it all figured out, but God does. And God has made this life such that it provides us with the maximum benefit and the least amount of suffering. And, it's already perfect. If there was something that God could change to make it better, God already would have changed it.
Do sometimes souls from previous lives we've had problems with reappear in our current life to better deal with them, so that we better deal with them?
Yeah, I think probably so. I don't have a specific example like that, except there was one friend I definitely had in a previous life that now was a little bit of an adversary in this life. But yeah, I think sometimes souls do interact with the same souls over and over again. One thing I forgot to point out was that this group of souls I was with when I talked about being in the sea of souls, that's part of what I would call my soul group. And I've heard other people mention the same thing. And I have like an intimate spiritual relationship with those souls, and that some of those souls I'm going to see again in other lives. Like, we have a deeper connection because we're part of the same soul group, and that sometimes our guides will use those members of our soul group to play a key role in our life, maybe a transition point or some critical juncture to help push us in the right way. So yeah, I think we do see some of the same souls repeatedly, and specifically and especially members of our soul group.
And sometimes I've also heard and read that the people who give us the hardest time are actually the ones that will give us the biggest hug on the other side because they put you through so much, but it was for your own good, as it were.
Yes, I concur with that. I think that's absolutely true. Um, you know, someone who is playing some kind of the bad guy role in your life. I know they might seem like the villain or your enemy, but there's a good chance that was planned out spiritually, and they might be a very good friend of yours spiritually. But you needed that experience to change you, and if and the reasons it's difficult is because that forces you to change quickly, and it's has a big effect on you. But yeah, the people that are our biggest enemies in life, they could be our closest friends in the spiritual realm.
Okay. So, what is the purpose to the realms between lives? Why a negative realm?
So the way I view it is that there's certain activities we can make where it's incompatible with the heavenly realms. Okay, if I go around murdering people, torturing people, that's just completely incompatible with heavenly realms. And so, in order for God to help us to change ourselves very quickly, God gives some of the worst offenders or the people making the worst choices the full spiritual consequence of their decisions, which is a hellish environment and a very unpleasant experience. And by receiving the full spiritual equivalent of our actions, we quickly learn this is not good. This is not what I want to do. And so we learn a lesson from that. And it's kind of at the subconscious level, but it's an important lesson that we retain. And so by spending a period in this very, very unpleasant realm, we learn a very powerful and lasting lesson that we should not be engaged in whatever activity or conduct is the mirror of that realm, and that the all these different types of bad things we can do, they have a different spiritual realm that corresponds to it. So someone who goes around murdering a bunch of people, or someone like someone who repeatedly rapes other people, or tortures other people, or steals from other people, the spiritual realms associated with those conduct are all a little bit different and specifically tuned for that specific action.
Another question here. How do you keep your closet so uncluttered? Just kidding. Okay, more serious question coming now. The 25.
Well, I do straighten it up a little bit before I do an interview like this.
Okay, the 25-year-old son of a friend has been almost constantly suicidal the last 2 years, and no meds or anything like that have helped. Do you think there is anything to share with him that could help?
Yeah, that's tough. I know there's a plan to this life and that there's a reason for these things, but I know people are going through some very difficult times and situations, and I don't want to minimize that at all. Like I know these are very challenging for a lot of people. I guess the only thing I could say is that there's a silver lining to these all these difficulties we face in life, and that we'll eventually receive those silver linings. There's a benefit to these difficulties we go through, and if this guy can persevere and continue through life, he's going to reap a huge benefit. Okay, there's going to be a huge benefit to him personally by thriving through, by continuing through life and going through this difficult time. There's going to be a benefit to him, and then I encourage him to, keep going through one day at a time, and eventually it's going to get better. And I guess that's the best I could do is to say, hey, there is a significant benefit to going through this difficult experience for this guy and for all of us.
And of course, the person has to really take that on faith because their experience is, this is miserable. I hate it here. Why do I have
Right.
you? And especially if they have no sense of there being an afterlife or any kind of consequence or any accountability, as it were, any life.
Right.
I'd like to try to answer that question as
Okay.
well, and that is, I'm a therapist counselor, and have had clients who have been had a lot of suicidal ideation. And one of the things I try to see if I can find a crack somewhere in terms of, do they have any faith or any spirituality whatsoever? And if there's a little bit of spirituality, then I will try to introduce the whole notion of the near-death experience, a lot of the literature that's out there. In other words, to try to shine light on an alternative hypothesis to what life is about, that maybe this is something that we have planned, maybe that we are trying to grow and learn. It's just another way, another perspective. And if there's just a little opening, sometimes people will run with that, and it can give them a sense of, well, okay, maybe it isn't just the flesh and blood and there's nothing after this life. Maybe there is a lot more that I can't see in the here and now. And it can, in some cases, turn things around. Not always. Yeah. It just depends on the individual. But why does God create all these souls to learn all these lessons and grow? What's the point?
Because we're going to be immensely happy at some point. I think God created us for us to be happy and to enjoy our existence, and that what we're doing right now is just we're getting like the necessary but difficult parts out of the way very quickly right here at the beginning, and then we can really enjoy our existence at a much greater level.
Yeah. I loved what you also said at the end, as far as why do bad things happen to good people? The sort of big takeaways, as it were. And you said that bad things can sometimes be challenges that we have, can sometimes be directly tied to our own behavior in the past life. So right. Kind of a reckoning. It's like, okay, you did this, now experience what it feels like to have that done to you. You did that to somebody else, right? So
right, that could be, but also I think it's important to remember that's not the only reason. Like that might be a reason, but there's other reasons as well. So when we see someone else suffering, we don't know exactly why they're going through that difficulty. Our job is the same either way, is to be compassionate and try to help them if we can.
Absolutely. You also talked about that we may have deliberately planned to have these experiences so that we could grow spiritually, right? I mean, just trying to find some other reasoning for some of the challenges that we are going through, because that is so difficult for us to understand.
Right.
What's the point of all of this? Why put up with it, as it were?
Yeah, and another thing that maybe this suicidal son, another thing I might say to him and to everybody else is, if you think of life as a gym, I could go to the gym and lift a couple 5-pound weights a couple times and maybe get on the treadmill for a couple minutes and be done. And that's a really easy time in the gym. And then there's someone else who's lifting heavy weights. They're like training for the Olympics. They're on the treadmill. They're working really hard. They're sweating like crazy. Well, they're going to get a whole lot more benefit out of the gym than I am. I mean, sure, we both went to the gym, but the person who's really going through those difficult struggles, who's really putting in the work, they're going to get more benefit out than the people who have the really easy life. And I think that there's a correlation there. Like we're not all getting the exact same benefit out of life. Some people are getting a whole lot more spiritual benefit than others. And the ones really going through a difficult life, maybe they could take some consolation in understanding that, well, they're also going to get a much more significant benefit spiritually than those other people who have such an easy life.
And it may be that some souls are actually going through more of a vacation lifetime, an easier, because they've gone through so much hardship in prior lives.
Right. Yeah, that was something I saw, is that during a previous life I had done that. I had been through a couple really difficult lives, and then I had chosen a really easy life. And then I made a bunch of mistakes so yeah, some souls, they might be having an easy life, but that doesn't mean their last or their next life is that easy.
Right. You also said that sometimes bad things happen, or we agree to bad stuff to help other people. So there we are serving our soul family or our soul pod, so that they grow and learn, and that would be part of the agreement as well. The last one you mentioned was unintended consequences. And you talked about having really bad acne as a young man, and how difficult that was for you. I didn't quite understand how to put that together as far as
Okay. Yeah, so I didn't it's one of those things I forgot to talk about was when we were planning out my body, my physical body, what it would look like, and we made all these decisions, my guides explained to me, well, there's an unintended consequence of all these decisions we've made. This body will have really bad acne as a teenager. And it wasn't like we were intentionally planning for me to have bad acne. It was like a unintended side effect or consequence of other decisions. And so I think that it is important to understand that sometimes some of the bad stuff that happens is just necessary so that all the rest of life works out the way it's supposed to.
One of the questions I had for you before I heard your entire story here was how come it's only been in the last 2 years that you've really shared these experiences when this happened when you were 6? But I think you answered that because between the age of 6 and 36, there was a sort of an amnesia, the memory was hidden for good reason, so that you grow in faith. How interesting that it came back through Dr. Eben Alexander's article. We actually interviewed him.
Okay, good.
IANDS group, so we know his story, but you recognized something in him, and then you were ready to be able to allow the memories to come back. At that point, perhaps you developed enough faith to really be able to understand your experience and really share it and deliver it to other people in the way that it was intended.
Right. And it took a while for me to be able to talk about a lot of this stuff. I'm kind of an introvert. I'm happy to be quiet and not share. But I feel like this is important. I feel like I've got a couple, like the afterlife is a huge puzzle, and I've got a couple puzzle pieces. And so I want to share my puzzle pieces. And anyone who's trying can get a bunch of puzzle pieces from a bunch of different near-death experiencers and piece together a pretty good picture. But it took a while to where I was comfortable to share, and then it took a little bit of practice. And the first people I told were not necessarily receptive to what I was saying, and that was kind of a challenge to overcome. So it took me a little while to where I was comfortable to talk about this stuff. And then I know that some of the concepts, some of the stuff I'm saying, people don't agree. People have a different opinion, and maybe they're not opening to hearing what I have to say. And that can be challenging sometimes. That's difficult because I'm just trying to share, and it's not always well received. And so there is a burden, a hurdle to overcome to where a person becomes comfortable talking about an experience like this.
How do you handle if your own family, some members of your own family, are not handling it as well as you'd like them to? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I recognize that not everybody is going to be receptive to what I have to say or want to hear about my experience. And so I try to be respectful of that. If they don't want to talk about this experience or hear about it, I'm not trying to force it on anybody. I'm just trying to make it available to anyone interested in hearing about it. And that includes my family. They've got their own spiritual journey. They don't need to hear my experience for them to be successful in life and to get where they need to be. But I think my experience can be helpful to some people. And so that's who I'm trying to share it with.
And also people in our own families who perhaps don't share the same worldview, shall we say. It may be in one point in time, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to evolve and perhaps become more sympathetic as they get older as well, right?
Absolutely.
It's not something that's sort of static. Great. Well, I have run over. I am so sorry, but it was absolutely fascinating. I want to thank you deeply for joining us this afternoon. I do encourage you to get your book out and your story out because it's been wonderful.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for having me. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me share. And I really appreciate what you do. I think it's important work, and I think the world benefits from you doing interviews like this and getting them out there for people to see. So I appreciate that.
Hope you've enjoyed it because we have immensely. I certainly have. I speak for myself. It's been great.
I have. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night.